What I will recount to you is my own perceptions and what I remember that I experienced and was becoming aware of, and some of the thinking that I was doing at the time. I'd like to focus for a minute on the word security because it is UN Security Council Resolution 1325. The Security Council is charged with dealing with issues of and threats to peace and security. So they put those two things in a relationship that is very different from the relationship that feminists were beginning to see. They saw security not as the assurance of defense or the ability to wage war, but as the well-being of people. And that had been an integral part of women's involvement with the United Nations since the very beginning, since the charter. And women really had a vision, and there were women activists around the formation of the UN and the civil society of that time. They had a vision of the organization as truly a peace organization, peacemaking, peace building, and security to women meant well-being. That they struggled for peace because within peace would be the possibilities for the well-being of people. So in the years coming up to 1325, this thinking was coming about in expressions in the Peace Caucus of the Commission on the Status of Women. And it was out of that Peace Caucus that the idea of 1325 grew. We had for years heard from women from conflict zones, and they spoke not just of the missed possibilities for resolving the conflict, but they spoke about the degree to which everything they believed to be human security was being destroyed by warfare. So to them, security meant doing away with war. But their voices weren't being heard. I went maybe 4 or 5 times with women, and the women from Africa particularly would make great sacrifices to come, and they would go to delegations, they would go to the Department of Disarmament Affairs and lay out their experience and talk about the need for disarmament as a means to security. So there were two things that we were concerned about, and that was the concept of security, but the lack of women's representation in the security policy making, in the security arm of the United Nations. Not having a voice, we couldn't argue for these positions. And so at the CSW, there were always government briefings. The government would tell the civil society about their policies on certain issues. So civil society and the Peace Caucus decided, we're going to start briefing the delegations. So we laid the groundwork that way, holding briefings during the same time that they were at the interval between the formal meetings and telling them our positions. Then the idea emerged that we should pursue what's called an ARIA formula meeting, so that the Security Council, according to this formula, can be called into session around an issue that is essential to security, but not necessarily a crisis of security, which had usually called. So through a great deal of lobbying, a lot of patience, refusal to give in, We lobbied the delegations who were on the Security Council, who had people coming up on the Security Council, until finally we had scheduled an ARIA formula meeting, and we worked with the UN and with delegations. And so the draft resolution was largely the work of women, and we intended it to be a resolution that was a peace resolution and a gender equality resolution. Of course, we wanted the UN, the military, civil populations to be aware of violence against women in armed conflict. But that was not the main problematic, because our logic was, if we want to do away with violence against women in armed conflict, let's do away with armed conflict. And that's why we wanted to be equally represented in all matters of peace and security, as it says in the resolution, which was passed by acclamation. Very joyous time. Yeah. Well, the mobilization pre-resolution was primarily through the women's peace organizations and other peace organizations represented at the UN, with the support of their organizations. The degree to which organizations' membership was fully informed, I do not know, because I did not perceive that. The real mobilization came after the resolution was passed. And that resolution was about that mobilization was about the implementation and moving toward making sure that by whatever means their women were being included and women's concerns were being attended to. And the most active organization is a kind of network of networks, which is the Global Network of Women Peacemakers, who have been doing a massive globally strategized, locally carried out movement of education and training around the resolution to enable women to understand how they have a stake in it. So the mobilization has been mainly to have an awareness of the resolution, and then to have that awareness become implementation. And that now is worldwide, and all over the world, women's organizations and human rights organizations and other peace organizations are working toward that implementation. And I would dare to say that it might be the best known UN Security Council resolution of our times, because people don't say anything other than 1325. And most people, anyway, in transnational networks know what that means. So. Well, I don't think that the resolution itself differed too significantly from what we were envisioning at the beginning, because we saw in what came out of the Security Council great possibilities. Wherein it became problematic was in the interpretation, because there hadn't been the kind of education that has happened post-resolution. And the thinking within the organization and the thinking within the international system was still women as victims of conflict, not women, conflict and war, not women as actors in the resolution of conflict and in the creation of the conditions of peace. So the trend started to be more and more focused on violence against women, as I had mentioned before. And as my friend Cora Weiss says frequently, we did not imagine that you would pluck rape out of war and let the war go on. That was not the point. It was, as I said, to do away with that violence by doing away with war. So much of the education, much of the mobilization now has to be on fully implementing the intention for women's involvement in policymaking. And that is gradually happening. If you've noticed that the more recent, there were a whole spate. There was the first one, I'm blurring on numbers now, but there were several in the category that I would call violence against women category. And now there is this trend for resolutions dealing with the actual political participation of women. Because the central problematic is unequal power distribution in the world political system. And that's what one of the long-range goals of 1325 is, to equalize that power distribution.